And welcome back. Now that you've signed up or signed in to your Stripe account, you will see that there is this welcome message, which we will ignore for now. The main thing that we need to understand of what this dashboard shows us is the information regarding any payments that we've processed using Stripe. So because we, of course, have not processed any payments yet, we are going to see 0 for everything. And we're actually not going to process any live payments using the Stripe integration, so the bulk of this dashboard is actually pointless for the course of this lesson. There does need to be this activation that you need to do for your Stripe account if you actually want to see the data as well as process live payments. And this is due to legal reasons that Stripe needs to make sure that you are who you say you are. So they have to confirm your address, certain things about your business, etc. But we're not going to do that because we're not actually processing any payments at all. What we will do is actually just integrate the Stripe elements into our page, but we don't necessarily have to actually go through this whole activation process to do that. Now, if you want to, you completely can. Now that you have your own Stripe account, you can go through the documentation, you can set it up, right, and play around with all of the wonderful settings in this platform that Stripe provides. But we are going to ignore this for the course of this lesson. What we will do, however, is go to this developers section. So if we click this developers tab, we will see this new dropdown with the API keys in it. And that is what we want. So inside of here, we will see a publishable key as well as a secret key. And what these keys do is they tell Stripe when we put them inside of our application that our application wants to access this account. Now the secret key is hidden and you click it and it'll show you, but the secret key is going to be the live key that we use inside of a server or a server-like service that allows us to actually make charges. And you can only make charges using a backend server of some kind. So because we're not doing that, we are going to ignore this. Instead, what we need is this publishable key. And we need this publishable key in order to access the elements that Stripe gives us, including our checkout. So let's actually bring in the appropriate libraries into our application. So going back to our terminal, what we need to do is we need to yarn add the library React Stripe checkout into our packages. And what it gives us is this React bound version of the checkout button that Stripe provides that opens up that component that we saw that we want. And in order to use it, we are going to create a new component that leverages the underlying Stripe checkout button. And we'll do that inside of our components folder. So let's make one called Stripe button. And then inside of our Stripe button, we'll make a new file called stripebutton.component.jsx. Now, what we need is we got to import React from React, and then we need to import Stripe checkout from React Stripe checkout. And now that we have this, we pretty much have the bulk of what we need to import as far as libraries go. What we do have to write, though, is our component, which will be a functional component, which we'll call the Stripe checkout button, which will take in a price as a property. And then before we do our return, there's a caveat about the price that we got to talk about. So in order for a proper charge to be made, Stripe wants the price in cents. So because we're processing everything in USD, we have something like $50 represented as the price of our items, right? So for example, we know that the price of our items here is 18, 35, 90. But what Stripe wants to see is that value in cents. So instead of $50, they want 5,000 cents, or just the whole integer 5,000. So what we'll say is this const price for Stripe is going to be equal to price times 100. And then we also need our publishable key. So here we're going to make our const publishable key, which is going to be that key that we were looking at, this one. So just copy this over and set it into a string value for our constant. Next, we're going to do our return. And inside of our return, we're going to return the Stripe checkout component. And this Stripe checkout component takes a bunch of different possible properties that enable or disable different features that we have access to inside of our checkout dropdown. So if we go to the actual React Stripe checkout GitHub repo, we'll see that it has these properties that we can access. And a little explanation about what it does, but all we want are the ones that we need to think about. You can actually set all kinds of settings, right? You can change the currency, you can change what you want to display, what name, what image you want it to point to. You can set what component class you want it to be. So instead of a button, you can set it to a div. You can even disable or enable billing address, shipping address, Alipay if you want to process Chinese payments, Bitcoin if you want to take Bitcoin payments, Remember Me as an option. There's just so many things that you can set. But we're just going to look at the ones that are relevant to the ones that we want. So inside of our Stripe checkout, what we want is the label Pay Now. And then instead of the name, I'm going to set it as Crown Clothing. So you can set it as whatever you set the name of your application to. And then I'm going to enable billing address by putting billing address and shipping address. So these allow and provide those fields that request the user making the checkout to fill these information out. And then for the image, I actually have the address for you that I'm going to show in your resources. And then in description, we're going to use a string interpolation to say your total is, and then we're going to use our price value. And the reason we want to use our price value and not our price for Stripe is because we actually want the user to see the physical dollar value, not the converted cents value that we got to pass to our Stripe checkout, which we actually will pass in as amount. So we'll say price for Stripe. And then we will add as well our panel label, which we'll say is Pay Now. And then what we want to pass is the token. So the token is the on success callback that triggers when we submit. So the submission is going to get handled by this component. But for us, we pretty much just want on token to be a function that takes the token and then logs it out, because we aren't going to process the payment. So with the token, you would pass this to your backend, which then creates the charge, right? But because for us, we're not actually processing the payment, we don't need this. We're just going to alert payment successful, as well as logging the token so we can see what it looks like. And here we're going to pass on token. Oops. Need to set it to a const. And then our Stripe key will be our publishable key. And with that, that's all we need. A lot of settings, a lot of props, but that's all it is. And then we're just going to export out our actual button, right? Our Stripe checkout button as the default. And then we're going to import it into our checkout component. Components, Stripe button component. And we'll just put it at the very end here. And for the price, we're going to pass in the total. which if you remember, we get from our selector. And now, if we go back to our application, we'll see at the bottom we have our Pay Now button. And if we click this, we see that it renders this dropdown where we ask for an email, the name, the street, the postcode, the city, right? And then it automatically detects where you live. So I currently reside in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, but this will probably tell you where you currently live. And then if you unselect this, it asks you to either fill in billing or fill in shipping. Otherwise, on trigger, what it does is it just assumes that what you're going to fill in is going to be the same billing address as your shipping address. Now, you might see these errors here, but these just have to do with the way that this component is trying to render its own font, but it's not important. It doesn't actually impact any of the functionality of our application. It just has to do with how this component is currently trying to nest and bring in its own font. So these errors are irrelevant to us. Now, let's say we fill in with just some address. And then for the card number, this is where we actually need to leverage Stripe's fake credit card number, which I had listed here inside at the end of this component. So we're just going to place this warning message inside of our component as well. And what we'll do is that whenever the person using our application is going to pay, we just got to make sure that they see that message first. So we'll put it in red text at the bottom here so that they fill that in. But we know that it's 4242, 4242, 4242, 4242. Month and year is 0120, and then CVW is 123. So 0120, 123. And we hit our Pay Now. We get our check mark. We got our alert that says the payment was successful. And we should actually log the object. And this, you'll see, is just the format of the token object that Stripe needs in order to create a charge. And that's all this is. We just take this, we make a API call and throw it to our backend, and then our backend code would handle the actual charge. So that's how it would typically work in a real flow. But for us, we're not doing that. This is enough to demonstrate that as a React developer, you know how to integrate with Stripe. Now, the reason we have to use these React-like tools is because React requires a specific set of bindings that the base Stripe documentation and the Stripe code does not integrate well with, because that's just vanilla JavaScript. So we actually leverage these Stripe components that people have wrapped on our behalf as a library, and usually they're very simple wrappers that allow us to actually use them inside of our React application. But it's that simple. Just like that, we now have a fully integrated Stripe feature. Now, let's actually throw in our warning and modify the style so that we see it in red. So we'll go back to our code. And what we will do is at the bottom of our code here, we are going to put a div with the class name of test warning. And we want to say with the star, please use the following test credit card for payment. We're going to put a break element here so that our text goes on the next line, and we're just going to say 4242 4242 4242 4242 slash expiry 0120 CVV 123. So there's different numbers that you can find in the Stripe docs for different cards. Like you can test a MasterCard. This, I believe, is Visa, but they're just test cards that Stripe provides that they recognize in their checkout flow that the credit card is accurate. Otherwise, the checkout flow actually throws an error. It just tells you that the card is invalid. And what we're going to need to do is we need to add inside at the very bottom, just after the total, we'll say test warning, text align center, margin top 40 pixels, font size 24 pixels, and then color is red. Now if we see, looks like we're not getting our color. Oh, forgot the R. That's why. Or sorry, forgot the N. Test warning. Okay. And let's just also modify the button that we have inside so that we'll do margin left auto and margin top of 50 pixels, just so that everything's spaced out a little better. There we go. Okay, cool. And sorry, as I was saying before, if you don't fill in this information, the component doesn't let you proceed. So if like your email is wrong, for example, also tells you that this is still incorrect. It has to follow the right format. And if your card that you use is not the correct one, this will also fail. So that's the great thing about this component. Everything is pretty much built for us. All the checks, all of the validations. It's an incredible, incredible service. And now that we have this integration built in, we've pretty much built the majority of the features in our application. And in the next sections, we are going to start covering some more advanced topics.